Good morning, Alan. Hello, everyone else, and welcome to TARDIS Spider. I'm Terry. How many doctors per decade? In the classic era, both the 60s and the 70s had two doctors. Yet the 80s had four doctors. How many doctors best serve a decade? And if you like this video, please watch and subscribe. And a moment to say thank you to everyone who subscribed in the last few weeks. We have gone over 750 subscribers. So now, how many doctors per decade? The classic series of Doctor Who spanned three decades: the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. The 1960s and 70s each had two doctors. The 1980s, four: Tom Baker in 1980, Peter Davison, Colin Baker, and Sylvester McCoy. I could add a fifth doctor, the Valeyard from season 23, but for purposes here, he is a plot device, not a fleshed out doctor. I think the span of a decade is best served with just two doctors. I know the 1960s Doctor Who is not 10 years of programming, while the 70s and 80s get 10 full years. So let's look at some of those numbers. The 1960s, by years, the decade with the shortest time span for the decade to be broadcast. Yet there are more episodes and more stories packed into this decade. It has 6 full years and the last month or so of 1963. There are 253 episodes, with 130 for William Hartnell and 123 for Patrick Troughton, about 42 episodes a year. For the full 10 years of the 1970s, Doctor Who is on the air, the only decade to reach this high point. Even the new series does not reach this mark with its many gap years, and with 10 full years, this decade has the most episodes: 272 plus Shada, which I think would be four more. That's 128 for John Pertwee, 144 plus Shada for Tom Baker. Baker will have the longest run in the classic era of Doctor Who. The 1970s would average 27 episodes a year. So while it was on the air for more years than the 60s, they would have 15 fewer episodes a year. This, truthfully, was to lighten the load for the health of the actors. The decade of the 1980s: 10 years, but not 10 seasons. Similar to what is happening for the last decade in the new series. There are gaps without anything broadcast. In fact, basically, the show was canceled twice. So in the 1980s, there are 180 episodes plus the five doctors. Now, this number is different from the official episode count, as season 22 has 13 45-minute episodes. For comparison's sake, I count them as 26 25-minute episodes to match the other seasons. There are four doctors in the 1980s: Tom Baker, 28 episodes; Peter Davison, 70 episodes; Colin Baker, 40 episodes; and Sylvester McCoy with 42 episodes. The three doctors, who are entirely in the 80s, all have fewer episodes than any of the previous four doctors. To many, the 1980s is the weakest of the decades for Doctor Who. This is not to say that the 80s is an era of bad Doctor Who. Remembrance of the Daleks, The Caves of the Androzani, and others are considered some of the best of classic Doctor Who. But many things, mostly off screen, would lead to the thought that the 1980s is the weakest of the three decades. On screen, to me, we have too many doctors. I like all three, all for different reasons. The problem: none of them had enough time to grow into the part. Peter Davison, with 70 episodes, feels the most complete. Yet Colin Baker's Doctor definitely is not finished. But Big Finish and the novels would expand the opinion of fans about him. The planner and mysterious Doctor of Sylvester McCoy has left fandom for years wanting his story to be finished. The Doctors are what define a decade in classic Doctor Who. Each decade and its doctors is different. Not just the time zone, but the feel, the style, and the techniques and the presentation of the show. In the 1960s, William Hartnell and Patrick Troughton created the character and what the series is. In the 1970s, John Pertwee was cool. Tom Baker, more than any other doctor, has the it factor, showing us that the 1970s are a golden age for our favorite show. Everything comes together in this decade, and both doctors are fully developed. The 1980s, with four doctors, is best described as too many cooks in the kitchen. No one doctor really has his story finished. There is only enough time for two doctors in a decade to get the best from each doctor. So, who to keep? Who to lose? For me, keep Colin Baker and Sylvester McCoy. I feel Davison's doctor is a transition doctor. Quiet and steady, keep the ship on course. Colin Baker and Sylvester McCoy are bringing new ideas and a new presentation of our hero. Completing their stories would have better built the series for the decade of the 1980s. Regardless, I love 1980s Doctor Who. I enjoy 60s, 70s, and 80s classic Doctor Who. And I also like most of New Who. So enjoy your journey through time and space, and good night.